Five.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Indivisible El Dorado's Hands Off Your Votes webinar. My name is Greg Bergantz, and I'm honored to serve as moderator for our panel tonight. Before we get started, some housekeeping. Please use the Zoom Q&A feature for any questions you may have during the webinar. Even if you don't have any questions yourself, you can access the questions that others have posted and upvote those questions that you have a particular interest in. At the end of the first part of the webinar, I'll be going over the Q&A and reading the questions with the most upvotes. We'll work our way through as many as we have time for in order of popularity. There's another reason to keep an eye on the Q&A. Panelists may respond to your question live during the webinar, so you want to keep an eye out for that. I'd also like to announce our next membership meeting is coming up soon on August 1st, where we'll be kicking off our Turnout to Win effort in coordination with Indivisible Marin. This will be a virtual meeting, and we hope to see you all back here on Zoom on August 1st at 2 p.m. The link to register for the Zoom meeting is on our homepage, indivisibleeldorado.org. Please register today. At this time, I'll introduce today's panelists. I'll share just enough background on them to serve as a teaser. Their full bios are also available on our website at indivisible.org, and they're much more detailed than what I'm going to say here, so I encourage you to check those out. I'll begin with Mr. Joel McCleary, co-founder of Keep Our Republic. He was the White House Deputy Assistant to President Carter, where he oversaw agency-wide personnel and management review. He served as treasurer of the Democratic National Committee and sat on its National Executive Committee. We're also thrilled to have Mary Small, Indivisible's managing director. Mary Small serves as Indivisible's in this role, she leads Indivisible's organizational strategy, including electoral, advocacy, and educational impact, as well as overseeing key operational functions. Next, we're very fortunate to have Yael Bromberg. Yael is an adjunct professor of law at American University's Washington College of Law and a national expert on voting rights. Her research and teaching focuses on democracy law, constitutional law, and the evolution of rights, with an emphasis on the 26th Amendment. And I'm sure she'll be going into that. Also joining us today is one of my esteemed colleagues at Indivisible El Dorado and co-chair, Joel Ellinwood. Joel retired after a 44-year career as a lawyer, specializing in land use, environmental, and election law. He moved to El Dorado County 3 years ago and has since been a vital advisor to community alliances. Finally, I'll introduce Les Francis, who, along with Mary Elliott Clem, also of Indivisible El Dorado, was instrumental in filling out this wonderful panel we have today. Les is an American political consultant and public affairs advisor. He is also a board member of Keep Our Republic. Les served as chief of staff to Congressman Norm Mineta, deputy assistant to the president and deputy White House chief of staff in the Carter administration, executive director of the Democratic National Committee, staff director and acting campaign manager in the 1980 Carter-Mondale re-election campaign, and executive director of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Les, please start us off with any remarks you'd like to share, and if you would, follow that by introducing Mr. McCleary.
Great.
All yours.
Thank you very much, Greg. Thanks for that kind introduction, and thank you for the invitation to meet with the group today. I don't know who all is on, but I'm assuming I met several of the folks who participated during the early days of Sierra Forward, when I was crisscrossing the then 4th Congressional District as we were organizing, trying to defeat Tom McClintock. We never succeeded in that, but we brought down his margin of victory, and people all across the region contributed to that. I'll introduce Joel here a little bit more in a minute, and he'll discuss what has been termed a rolling coup already underway in America, and our work with Keep Our Republic. I will say at the outset that while we both have ties with KOR, Joel was one of the founders and founding board member. I just joined the board in the last couple of weeks. And we can talk about KOR, but we're not, in this session at least, we're not necessarily representing the views of KOR. So they can have plausible deniability.
Mhm.
What is KOR? It is, as the website says, a nonpartisan civic education organization committed to the vitality of America's democracy by promoting trust in elections, the rule of law, and constitutional checks and balances. As David Skaggs, who is the new chair of KOR, former congressman from Colorado, has said, we're nonpartisan, but that doesn't mean that we're not political. That's an important distinction, especially in this conversation. Among the works of KOR is what's called Article 3 coalition, which is made up of retired federal and state judges appointed by both Republican and Democratic presidents and governors, a group of which just completed a 4-day swing through southwestern Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Michigan, meeting with citizens and activists and community leaders in those key states, talking about election law and the protection of our elections. They also have organized efforts going on, and developing coalitions in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Georgia, and I think Joel starting maybe in Arizona soon, or if I'm not mistaken. But um, and the judge's bus tour was called Justice in Motion, which I thought was pretty clever. Got great press coverage throughout the region. Um, we also work in coalitions or partnerships with alliances with organizations such as the Campaign Legal Center, the Brennan Center, the National Constitution Center, Democracy Rising, and others. Going and have done an amazing amount of research, most of which has been headed by Joel McCleary and his partner in the effort, Mark Medish. They did a deep dive into the question of presidential powers, including executive authority, continuity of government, and something called PEADS, PEADS, Presidential Emergency Action Documents, something that very few people know about. And I would guess that most of the people participating today have not heard of PEADS. Joe will briefly survey his years of work in this area during the next 10 or 15 minutes, and we'll take questions afterwards. So it's my honor to introduce an old friend and colleague, I should say, friend and colleague of long standing, not old, Joel McCleary.
Thank you, Les. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to all of you. And some of you, I think I met the other day when Les set up a briefing on the youth vote from 18 to, I guess, 28, a project that's been going on at Harvard. And I was floored when I realized that one of the major issues on students' minds was the abuse of emergency powers. Not that I felt that anybody understood what that meant, because very few people do, but I just shows you how prescient a lot of young people are, because they're right to be very, very concerned. Let me go back into history a little bit, and let me put a disclaimer at the beginning of this. I am not in any way opposed to a president having absolute dictatorial emergency powers in an existential crisis, such as a preemptive launch. Let's say these submarines, Russian submarines sitting off the coast here, were to launch against Washington and the major cities, or God knows what other kinds of nuclear catastrophes we could have. I think that it's fair to say that we are more on the verge of a nuclear holocaust than any time in history, including the Berlin crisis. And that is because of the proliferation of nuclear weapons, but also because of the movement of technology. When Les and I were in the White House, I was honored to, because I was a good coffee carrier, to be on Air Force One with President Carter and the man who carried the doomsday briefcase and the Attorney General and Brzezinski. And I overheard a conversation that took me 25 or 30 years to understand what I heard. I didn't have the briefing, I hadn't clearances to hear it, but it changed my life when I heard it, because I looked at this wonderful little man. He was small, Carter, and he was asking Brzezinski how could he buy him more time before he had to launch 2,700 nuclear warheads to take out China, obviously the Soviet Union and their allies. And how could he be assured that it wasn't a mistake? And was there another way to go, that maybe we could take out the leadership in the Soviet Union and then have some communication with the military to find out if there was some way that we could de-escalate it? Because Carter was probably the most knowledgeable man of any man that's ever served in the White House on nuclear weapons. He studied under Admiral Rickover. He was commanded a nuclear submarine with nuclear weapons in it. He helped contain in Canada a nuclear accident. So he spoke with real authority, which is very unusual. And we were lucky to serve with him. And he actually changed. Well, so I got a feeling for it at that time period. So let's just go back in history, what Carter inherited and what every president since then has inherited. And that was the idea of what kind of deterrence should we have? How do we make sure that enemies know that we have mutual assured destruction, that if they try to attack us first, we can at least destroy all mankind and all civilization, and basically life as we know it on planet Earth. And it's pretty alarming when you sit in a room where people are discussing those things and they're real. The problem since then, so we developed systems basically starting from Eisenhower of how to survive a nuclear holocaust or a first strike attempt. And Eisenhower was the first person who put together things called presidential emergency action documents. The frightening thing about these documents is anybody who really knows, by the way, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a scholar, I'm a concerned amateur that loves to delve into these things, and I've studied it now for almost 10 years. But these presidential emergency action documents were the way that, like out of a Dr. Strangelove movie, we were going to try to survive after we were basically obliterated. And at that time period, we still thought about protecting the civil population. But as we got into the nuclear arms race, we began to realize this is a very important point as we move along, that actually both Russia and our Soviet Union ourselves, we're going to make the civilian population what they call hostages, meaning that Russia and ourselves didn't try to build a whole structure because we knew it was useless to try to protect the citizens of the United States of the Soviet Union. And we also thought that if the other one, each power thought the other one was getting strong enough to do that, that might give them the notion of doing a preemptive launch. So our main concern during the 50s was the nuclear, and also, which has not been discussed much, but even by the Eisenhower administration, this is another big secret that's still kind of out there in some ways. We had already proven the ability to build. We had this testing done. We weren't building them yet. Nuclear lethal equivalent biological weapons, which by the mid 60s we tested down in the South Pacific. And these weapons actually were more horrendous and more deadly than even the bomba, the largest nuclear weapon that was ever let off by the Russians. And but we didn't talk about that much because we really didn't have any counter to it. We did have an offensive program for a while because we felt that we would respond in kind if it occurred. So in the beginning of presidential emergency action documents, or a thing called continuity of government, what we plan for is, could we save the leadership? And almost any plan, and I think this is something Mr. Trump was rather haunted by when he first got read into all this. This is just my conjecture. Was it's very difficult for the president to survive if there's a preemptive attack, because we've gone down. It used to be 8 or 9 minutes that you had to make a decision on 2,700 nuclear weapons, but it's God knows how with the submarines off of the California American coast, you could be down. And this is not a professional view. I just my own calculations down to 4 minutes, 3 minutes before the first strike. But at least it was defined, and this is very important. We had one really defined enemy, and that was the Soviet Union, and we were pretty sure that it was going to be two different kinds of weapon systems that we might get hit with. And so the early PEDs were these extraordinary powers that a president had, absolute total dictatorial powers. I mean, the end of habeas corpus, the ability to detain anybody to search and detain and arrest with really arrest warrant or anything, to print their money on their own. I mean, it was total. And one of the funniest things was when Eisenhower put together the government that was going to serve, it was basically his golf buddies, because he figured everybody in the government would be gone. But then when Kennedy came to power, this is very important. Almost right when he came to power, he was briefed by the Joint Chiefs saying, Curtis LeMay and others, saying, Mr. President, we need to conduct a first strike against the Soviet Union, because if we wait, they're going to attain parity with us. Very few people have really studied this period. And Kennedy at first said, God, and they call ourselves human. That's what he said when he left. And then he looked for alternative ways, both to defend the country, or to at least to defend the leadership, knowing that the civilians would be finished probably, but at least have some kind of structure left. And that was called the continuity of government that was put together. Since Kennedy, every single president has done nothing but really broaden those powers and put together the infrastructure. So as we sit here tonight, and I'll walk you through this in a minute when we put a chart up, basically a president with having to talk to any other authority without having to review this with the Congress or the Supreme Court or the Group of Eight, they can do what they call activate COGCON, COGCON. And there's a multi-billion-dollar structure. It sounds like, it's so strange to talk about this. It sounds like it's out of a science fiction novel, but this is real. In 4 minutes, that whole program is initiated. People run to where they need to be in order to protect either the president or who's going to be the designated president and all that. And that's supposed to be put together within 4 minutes. You've also heard about this plane that circulates around. It was just out in LA. People follow it, and that's kind of what they call the doomsday plan, or the doomsday plane. But what happened as we moved along, technologies changed, and as we flip through very quickly the decades before I go back and talk about these specific powers, obviously we started dealing with terrorist threats. We started dealing with cyber threats. I mean, we have germ warfare at a level that we hadn't contemplated before, so that the number of players that could create an existential crisis in the United States and for our country has multiplied, and so the technologies have in terms of how we were to respond or not respond. So let's put up the chart now. It's very hard to have this conversation. Les and I have been struggling with it. We've talked to top newspaper people all over the country, and everybody gets this confused, because you'll hear people talk about emergency powers this and emergency powers that. But actually, there are very many different emergency powers. And you have to understand what these are and what their authorities are. Usually when people refer to an emergency power, they're referring to a statutory national emergency, in which, for example, when Trump called a national emergency along the border, he had to go to the Congress. And there's some restriction on, after you announce this to the Congress, like with war powers, that the Congress has to approve it farther on. So there is some public awareness of this. And this is what's so strange. When you talk to a senator or a congressman, they'll say, oh, well, I know all about emergency powers. But actually, these last two things in this chart, they have no knowledge of. They've never seen it. They've never been briefed on it. And as I like to say again, anybody who knows about emergency powers cannot say, and if they say, they go directly to jail. It's probably as top secret is the nuclear code itself. There's also, people talk about, Trump talks about it a lot, talking about using the Insurrection Act. Well, the Insurrection Act is a very powerful weapon. There's no question about it. It gives the president a lot of authority, but it is reviewable in one sense, and it also the people know about it, and you can go to the Supreme Court, and people have a knowledge upon which to judge it. Then there's this little thing that not a lot of people know about, but everybody who runs an internet company or a national television station or radio station or newspaper knows about, and this is called the communications power. And this is an act that was put together in 1934. And basically, this is, people say, well, why have all the big data companies just bent over for the president? Well, they know that the president can walk in. I mean, maybe he wants to put somebody on the board of Meta, like Dan White, or let's say he wants to put someone who's very close to him, in the number 2 slot. I mean, actually, the president of the United States, if they want to use this power, have immense power, not only over the networks, like through the FCC and other powers, but this is one reason that we're moving into a real era of censorship. And I think it was Nicole Watson the other day said on MSNBC, really, we have the Atlanta magazine, we have MSNBC, and we have the New York Times, and everything. Those are probably the 3 unhinged or unrestricted mass media things that we have. And of course, we all know that they will be under threat as well. But that comes through this very important power. But it's a power that was given to the president by what we call Article 1 powers. It was granted to the president through the Congress. Then we have this thing called covert actions. This is like the war in Nicaragua and all that. I'm very aware of time here, so I'm going to go very quickly now. So when a president wants to do a secret operation or a covert operation, they still have to go to the Gang of Eight to brief it. And so there is some scrutiny over it. Obviously got completely out of control during the Iran-Contra. And for one example, or during Watergate, it got all confused. People went to jail. The Attorney General went to jail because people weren't very clear about what these powers were and what they actually had and what they were just assuming. These last 2 are the most important for us. And they're different. They're a little different, but they work in parallel. And this is the powers that were put together. We don't know their constitutionality. The justices have never been briefed on it. The Congress has never been briefed on it. The public doesn't know much about it. But in minutes, a president, if they were irresponsible, could declare these powers, and this whole mechanism would go into effect. Now, very important institutes around town here will tell you, that the feds can't get involved in a federal election, and that would be unconstitutional. And then they have this great sigh of relief. But that is not something to have a great sigh of relief about, because even if these powers are, quote, unconstitutional, it doesn't matter, because as soon as you enter into this thing called COGCOM, you are out of the Constitution. My cousin who taught me much of this, who used to be head of the church committee and also the president's commission on the presidential powers, said to me, a president of the United States has 2 existential powers. One is to blow up the world metaphorically with a push of the button, and the second is to end the Constitution with not even a stroke of a pen, but with the activation of these powers. And to this date, we have never had a president yet who was willing for non-existential issues, meaning for national issues, to step into this territory. And what we're confronting right now, and especially I think the whole nation woke up to something's going on here, particularly last night, is we're dealing with a president who showed on January 6th that he's willing to step into these kinds of areas. And so we don't have to speculate about whether he's willing to use extraordinary powers. The question would be, does he need to, and is he going to? And so it's very important, extremely important, that all of us understand a little bit of this and get other people to understand that we really are dealing with an extremely powerful president. When he says, "I'm more powerful than anybody on the planet," he's actually correct.
Ask in the Q&A.
Right? Oh,
Right.
so then we'll go into questions and stuff. But this is basically the difference between a COGCOM, that's the structure of the government. That's how you get people out to into their posts. That's the airplanes, the car, all this. People have directions, secret directions to move to certain places immediately once we go into this. This was activated once on 9/11, and it kind of was a mess because everybody hadn't done it before, and people didn't really follow. But it was actually secretly alive for 6 months, and partly that was because we thought there was a loose nuke in Washington D.C., and people kept it in just in case it was found out that there was a loose nuke here. And then the PEDs are these documents. Now, what's important is nobody approves these. If President Trump wants to sit there and write 55 different PEDs, just like his executive order, I hereby declare that Les Francis is, low down, dirty scallywag, and he needs to be arrested immediately, and anybody in association with him, that would be a PED in reality. And there's nobody, that's a presidential action document. So what we need to do is we need to ask a lot of questions, try to get some transparency. We can't have the leadership of this country and the citizens having these things dangling over us, because they are an absolute power that Trump has. And if he goes bonkers, almost finished. If he goes bonkers, or if he's panicked or whatever, if he thinks that it's the jailhouse or the White House, and he starts stepping into these powers. For example, on January 6th, he didn't really understand this. And the reason, this is my closing sentence, there were two heroes, believe it or not, on January 6th. One was Pence, and the other one was Bill Barr, believe it or not. Because when Bill Barr went in December, and he resigned and would not say to President Trump that there had been theft in the election. Bill Barr knew these powers better than anybody, because he'd worked with Vice President Cheney and with Rumsfeld and nothing through decades, since the first time he served in the CIA. So he knew where these powers were, and he would have known how to execute them. And if he had been on board, we would not be in a democracy today, I can promise you. So that's my introduction, and I'll open myself to questions.
Thank you, Joel. That was truly terrifying. Perfect for the first speaker of the evening. But we'll have Q&A. People can put their questions in the Q&A, and we can address them later. We need to move on to Mary. Mary Small serves again as Indivisible's managing director. She previously served as Indivisible's chief strategy officer and legislative director. And Mary, you've got the floor.
Amazing. I was going to say that I'm so glad to be here with all of you, but now I'm lightly traumatized. No, but all jokes aside, I am glad to be here with all of you and appreciate you inviting me and having me. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of a pivot from what some of the threats are that we face. And the truth is that Joel only went over some of them, some particularly scary, less known ones, but not the only ones, right? And you all are on this call because you've been paying attention, because you're the kind of people who track this stuff. And so you're aware that there are 87 different ways that this could look, in ways that are attempted to fundamentally make sure that votes aren't counted. Votes from eligible voters eligible voters can't vote, or their votes aren't counted, or the people who were elected aren't seated, right? That can happen in a bunch of different ways, but ultimately those are sort of the three goals that someone who wanted to subvert a democracy would go after. And if you remember nothing else from my section of this call, I want you to hear these two things. One, because we have like a couple of different things that we're trying to float between. So we've got the folks who are dismissing these threats, who are saying, nah, it's going to be fine. There's a lot of kerfuffle, but ultimately, the systems are going to hold. It's not that serious. It's going to be fine. But on the other hand, we've got folks who are sort of in a doomer mindset, who are sort of like it's naive to believe that we could still have elections that function in the United States. It's a lost cause. And the place where we have to hold ourselves is in a place of grounded action. So we're not on either of those poles. We're not dismissing threats, nor are we in a doomer place. We believe that the threats are incredibly real, and it's our obligation to take them seriously and to prepare. That's in one hand. And in the other hand, we can and will defeat them. We will do it together, right? An attack on our election system to undermine the will of the people will not succeed because the people on this call and millions more people, people of good conscience, pro-democracy people are going to be the reason why it doesn't. So those are the two pieces. Very real and is our obligation to prepare. And they will not succeed, but it will require action from all of us if they really do go for it and try. Okay, so I was asked to talk about a couple of different things on the call tonight because I understand that we've got folks here from El Dorado, but also other places in California, and maybe a few folks from around the country as well. And so the first is the Election Defense Corps that Indivisible is building out in 7 key states. So that's in Alaska, Georgia, Iowa, Michigan, Ohio, and Texas. And the second is Hands Off Our Vote, which is active in the other 43 states and the District of Columbia. And so one is kind of in 7 key states, and the other one is in the rest of the country. But I actually want to talk about what they have in common, which is this. So first, pre-bunking election mis and disinformation and providing ongoing election protection updates, like just staying informed and keeping the people around us and those concentric circles of people that we have relationship with informed about what's going on as we're headed into this. And again, it's like keeping ourselves and also everyone that we can possibly touch out of dismissing the threats and also out of doomerism in a place, a pro-democracy prepared action place. So that's one. Second is providing concrete ways to take action as we ramp up into election season. Obviously, there's all of the normal sort of like get out the vote work that indivisibles all around the country do every election season. But on top of that, this year, in an increasing way, we're going to have to be prepared to take action as the administration begins to flirt with, try, see what they can get away with. And they're already doing it. They're taking steps here, nudging there, saying outlandish things there to see what gets a response, to see where the boundaries of outrage are. And so making sure that we have a response and a vehicle to take to take action in response to that. Building a trained network that is ready for mass activation if and when that is needed. And so those pieces about sort of sharing election protection related information, providing concrete ways to take action, having a vehicle for rapid response, and then building a trained network. All of those are the things that both the kind of battleground states and the rest of the country have in common. That is like an all of us task. And then there's a couple of additional pieces for the Election Defense Corps states. So those 7 key states, the program there is called Election Defense Corps. And the additional pieces there is a really intentional system to connect volunteers, so members of the Election Defense Corps, with critical roles, whether that's poll workers or poll monitors or Board of Election monitors, because that's going to be key for preventing or addressing voter intimidation or suppression at the polls during early voting and then on Election Day. So feeding volunteers into those key roles just to safeguard election infrastructure is part of it. And then the other part is making sure that we, and I mean like the big we, both locally and nationally are working hand in glove with each other with the relevant coordinating bodies. So each of those states that I named either already has or is in the process of setting up a state level election protection coalition to help coordinate responsive action at the state level and also to relate to the national coalition. So I think for me, it's helpful to think about this in sort of like the before crisis and the during crisis stage. And I'm just using crisis as a container for, again, 87 ways that this could go off the rails, but ultimately our job is actually quite similar in many of them. So I'm not trying to dissuade us from like thinking about some of the specific ways, but I do want us to prepare ourselves for action and remember that one of our most important jobs, if we sort of do end up in one of these scenarios, is to not freeze. One of our most important jobs is to not freeze. It is to look up, pay attention to what's happening, and then get in action. Because what will happen is there will be in some locality or multiple localities, but it will be like in place. It will be a specific geography where something is targeted. And it will be confusing and it will be unclear. And there will be people who are like, let's just pause and wait and see if this is a real crisis. And the balance of power can tip in that vacuum, in that moment. What it seems like society will metabolize, what it seems like society is willing to go along with, is defined in that pause. And so our job is in the pause to say, we are clear. Eligible voters can vote. Their votes will be counted, and people who are elected will be seated, depending on where we are kind of in the sequence. Okay, so I'm just saying crisis to say, whichever the things that is that happens, our job is to pay attention, to get connected, and to take action together. So in the before crisis stage, part of this looks like engaging productively with mis and disinformation about election safeguarding. It means getting in relationship with other indivisible groups, with other partners who are doing voter protection, so that those relationships exist before we are necessarily in a crisis, and then just being ready for rapid response if it's needed. During the crisis phase, what it really comes down to is our job is to absolutely refuse to accept, to refuse to metabolize like at the body of our society level, votes not being counted, or people who won not being seated. Just for time, I don't want to go on too long because I know we have other speakers to get to. But two links that I want to drop into the chat. Let's see if I can do this while I am talking. The first is if you want to, let me see if I can. Oh, do you know what? I can't actually send this to the whole. Okay, I'm going to
So
send.
Mary, if you send that to me, I can put it in the chat, and we will be sharing any documents afterwards through our website.
There we
Okay,
go. We've
amazing.
got you.
I just sent them to the host and panelist. And so if someone can pass them on to everybody, that's amazing. But if you don't end up seeing them in the chat, it sounds like you'll get them after the call. The two links that I just dropped are the link to the hands off our vote great action page. And so that will just be the mechanism through which you can get an alert every time that there is an action that we're all taking together in response to some shenanigans that the Trump administration is up to. And the second one is just a link to the Hands Off Our Vote kickoff call, which is on July 30th at 5 o'clock Pacific. And so if you want to do, rather than like the 7-minute version, if you want to do the full call version on this, July 30th at 5 o'clock Pacific, for the kickoff call, and then just the website to keep eyes on this as it develops overall. And with that, I will pause because I know we've got more people to get through.
Thank you, Mary. That's great. Make sure if you just click on those links, the document will probably open on your computer or your device, and then it's in your my documents. So take advantage of that. Our next speaker is Yael Bromberg. Again, thanks, Mary. Yael is, again, adjunct professor of law at American University's Washington College of Law. Her writings include a co-editor and author of Youth Voting Rights, Civil Rights, the 26th Amendment, and the Fight for American Democracy on College Campuses. Yael, it's all yours. You're muted.
Thank
There we
you.
go.
Hi, folks. Pleasure to join you all. And I'm joining from the East Coast, where we are subject to a plume of terrible air quality coming from the burnings in California. So on the heels of a crazy heat wave. So all of the, all of the fear that Joel has offered us.
From Canada.
Sorry, say that again.
To stand up for California, it's from Canada this time.
Oh, yes, it's from Canada.
Yeah.
Sorry if I blamed you all again for it.
It's usually us.
A bit about me. I am a constitutional rights litigator. I am a solo practitioner, so I am in state and federal courts. And one of my areas of focus generally is voting rights and election law and administration, and particularly the 26th Amendment, which we are celebrating the 55th anniversary of this month. I'm sure that if I asked for a raise of hands from the crowd, which I would see very few people would know what the 26th Amendment is. It is the most recent voting rights amendment to be ratified in U.S. history. Oh, we got a hand up from one of the panelists. Most recent voting rights amendment to be ratified in U.S. history, and the quickest amendment to be ratified at all. It rounded the requisite 38 states in less than 100 days. And we're fortunate that we have a panelist on the call who really was a major architect towards doing what would today potentially seem impossible, which is ratify an amendment to the Constitution. And then 55 years ago, the reason that it was ratified with such record speed was because of the widespread cross-partisan support and the extraordinary coalition that was knit together, in particularly led by youth voters. And what did they do? Because I always forget to say what the amendment actually is. They lowered the voting age to 18 and outlawed age discrimination with regard to access to the ballot. And I think that this is a really important history to remember, not only because we can spend time examining impediments to youth voting rights today that are violative of the 26th Amendment, but more broadly, because the nation has in the past been met with doom and gloom. We have overcome civil war. We have overcome the civil rights era, the Jim Crow efforts of imposing racial authoritarianism. And we have worked together in cross-partisan ways, actually, leaning into the ideas of fusion coalitions, of finding that we have more in common than we have in differences across the nation, from farmlands to the inner cities of, the coasts. And we have done that in times of serious national constitutional crisis twice, causing us to, when the country was really tearing itself apart through both political violence, such as Jim Crow, or different uses and abuses of rule of law, and accompanied by physical violence. The famous photo of John Lewis getting beaten on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, widespread lynchings, and the very bloody Civil War. And what has come on the other side of that is the ratification of bundles of amendments, right? This reconstruction of America. So after the first Civil War, it's very easy to forget that not only did we ratify one or two, we ratified 3 new constitutional amendments to the U.S. Constitution, overturning the institution of slavery, expanding equal protection under law and due process rights that would accompany that, and expanding the right to vote free of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Yes, the tide that rises all boats. This was done essentially on the backs of Black bodies, but those 14th Amendment principles have been expanded for the betterment of the rest of our U.S. society. And again, during the Second Reconstruction, we saw the same process happen between the period of 1954 with the Warren Court deciding the Brown v. Board of Ed litigation, outlawing segregation, through what I argue is ratification of the 26th Amendment, and within 1971. And during that time period, again, we had ratification of the 24th Amendment, outlawing the use of the poll tax. We had passage of the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65, the Housing Rights Act of 67, and then the 26th Amendment, 1971. And so, after hearing the forecast of where our political climate is right now, I do think that it's really important that we hold a vision of what a third Reconstruction could look like, and what a bundle of new constitutional amendments could look like in keeping with our national history of constitutionalism. And just very few examples, because I want to throw them out there, but this is not, this is a national project. Ratification of a 28th Amendment to overturn Citizens United. Approximately 80% of the population across partisan lines supports curtailing the flood of money in politics. This would be a no-brainer. This would be an absolute no-brainer that everyone could get behind, right? Final passage of the Equal Rights Act, right, for women's personal autonomy would be another major effort to pick up where the second Reconstruction left off. A ratification of the Electoral College. There would be others, DC statehood for one, as another example, right? And there are others that I am surely missing. But I think that the point is that we as a nation know how to reconstruct. In terms of patterns, we do so during times of deep political and physical violence. No more physical violence need to be seen than what was taking place during the attempted coup of our government on January 6th, right? And that we can come through this, but it will require action and engagement, voting, and protecting our vote. And I think I'll just kind of end with that. And because I focus on election administration and also youth voter participation, I'll leave a few kind of final comments here. Is that for those that are engaged with young people, either because you are yourself young, and I don't mean that you feel young, I mean that you are within the 18 to 24 age cohort, or you have children that are, or family members that are, it is critical that we engage in a multi-generational effort on all of these efforts. We have to really reknit. That is the power and the passion that we have always seen. Young people have always, even during the Civil War, some of our nation's founders were easy to forget, but they were teenagers during the Civil War, active in battle. They were quite young when they were participating in the awesome project of writing a constitution. I'm sorry, during the Revolutionary War. And we have to continue that. Young people have always written the story of America. The other piece with regard to election protection, critical for young people and in general, not just to register to vote, but to ensure that your registration has been processed, received and processed. If you are given a provisional ballot, to figure out how to make sure that your provisional ballot is actually counted. And the same with regard to the vote by mail, particularly if you have young people in your life that are away for college. Those vote by mails in the postal system, or just through the election administration system, or through the college mailbox system, are very easily lost. And it is put on young people, unfortunately, on an individualized level, because we haven't figured out systemic protections for them, to not only submit the ballot application in time, but to track that it's being received, that it's coming in time, and that it's going back in time, and that they have a stamp to do so, which is almost one of the hardest tasks of all that I listed. So these are very practical things, and they make a serious difference. And the way in which we can work systemically within our infrastructure, including our high school infrastructure, our infrastructure of institutions of higher education, and the county boards of elections are critical. They are critical backbones to our election infrastructure system. We should be working with our county clerks. We can be volunteering as poll workers. There is a plethora of opportunities to meaningfully engage in this. And just as some folks are ready to, go and, as they should, attend a rally and protest, there are other ways to also participate in the system to make sure that we are fortified heading into the midterms and the presidential election. I helped to run election protection for the state of New Jersey during the last cycle. And there were questions. There were ways in which the infrastructure was being clearly tested. And the best way to make sure that we were all in communication with each other and making sure that voters could actually get to the polls and that the polls were open and that people knew what was going on was to maintain the system of communication. So our prior speaker spoke about the Election Protection Coalition, 1866 Our Vote. I would really encourage folks to participate in that. That is a great network. I've worked with it over decades, year and year again. And there's just a plethora of opportunity. And I would encourage everyone to find a way to get involved. You don't have to do everything, but everyone has to do something.
Thank you, Yael. That was very enlightening. We have a question from a friend of ours from California Dems and Field Team 6. Frank, are you there? You've got your hand up. Frank Porter. Did we lose him? Okay, well, maybe he'll come back. Let's go on with Joel Ellinwood is one of my colleagues here and the co-chair of Indivisible El Dorado and an election lawyer. And I think he has something to say about California and the upcoming midterms. Joel?
Well, thank you, Yael. And I want to say greetings from a fellow Rutgers Law alum. Go RU. Anyway, I moved to California in 1984 as a legal aid lawyer with California Rural Legal Services. Learned about the Voting Rights Act in that regard, and since then have had occasion to litigate with regard to both the federal and the state Voting Rights Act. I volunteer with the California Democratic Party for its election protection attorney volunteer network. We're on standby throughout the election season to address, and I'd have to say, I've never actually had occasion to do anything because our election system is secure. And the great news about California is that we are unified at the governor, the secretary of state, and the district and the attorney general are unified in their commitment to protecting election rights in California. Not to mention, we have a decentralized system. So elections are actually administered at the county level, which in California means 58 different counties. And I've had the pleasure of representing elections administrators in 2 of those 58 counties, and then working with the County Councils Association of California on collaborative efforts to deal with election protection. We actually dealt with a federal complaint filed to challenge the 2020 election by the so-called Election Integrity Project of California that's didn't allege any actual fraud. They had no proof of it. They just said that mail-in voting creates the opportunity for fraud. And we went back and forth to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals twice before their complaint was dismissed. So we're prepared to deal with bogus claims like this, but that takes time, and we're looking at the potential for the kind of crisis that Joel McCleary was alerting us to. And for that, there are both the attorneys general who are collaborating with the ACLU, with the Brennan Center, with Mark Elias and his law firm representing the Democratic National Committee, who hopefully are completely aware of the kind of potential that Joel McCleary outlined for us and are preparing to respond should those eventualities occur. But the other thing is our truest defense is as a mass of citizens who are committed to nonviolent direct action. And that may mean in the streets, that may mean in a general strike. We have to show that the masses of citizens in the United States will not put up with this crap. And we find fascism unacceptable in America. No kings in America since 1776. That's our watchword, and that may ultimately be what we fall back up on. Um, I did want to highlight a couple of achievements that Yael Bromberg has brought through litigation. She was instrumental in getting Andy Kim on the ballot in New Jersey. So we have a U.S. senator who has stood up and taken pepper balls and addressing the immigration immigration extremism mass deportation extremism that we're experiencing in this country. So thank you, Yael, for helping Andy Kim get there. She's also defending public officials or bringing suit on their behalf for the same kind of unconstitutional activities that occurred at the detention center in New Jersey. So having lived in New Jersey for 10 years or so, I can appreciate the efforts that she's made there. So thank you, Yael, and thanks for sticking with us for a few minutes to answer some questions. So the existential question of the day from Erica Garners is, how can we prevent the president from stopping the voting rights of the people? Panelists, you care to take that on?
Well, let me take a swing at that. I think it goes to the point you made, the point that Mary made. This is going to take citizen action. Number one, the biggest possible turnout we can generate on election day. But we're also going to, she talked about a pause. We have to remember that we got the period between now and the election, we got the election day, we've got the count afterwards, and then we've got election certification, which is another place where bad behavior can have terrible effects. And that'll go until January 3rd when the new House is sworn in, and then January 6th when the electoral votes are, well, we're not there yet, that's 2028, but January 3rd when the new House is there. I commend Jonathan Alter's article that he wrote Substack on the 18th of June, I think, where he puts forward a scenario where the ultimate answer is going to be millions of people saying that they will not tolerate a hijacking of this year's election, and that's why Indivisible and other groups are so important to get people ready for a long struggle. It's not going to be easy, and the executive powers and what Trump has up his sleeve or could enact can make all this even worse, more dangerous. Another reading assignment, I just finished reading Regime Change by Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan. There is so much corruption, so much malfeasance, so much criminality that has gone on in this administration. One, it's impossible to keep track of. But they are going to be desperate to hang on to power and to not have to face congressional subpoenas and investigations. The line that Joel used, the White House or the jailhouse is, I think, something we have to keep in mind.
Yes, another question from Ruth Michelson pointing out that Yael is the proper pronunciation of Ms. Bromberg's first name. And uh, saying we ourselves may not be 18 to 24, and our children may be older than 18 to 24. But don't forget about those in the audience who may have grandchildren 18 to 24, or friends and acquaintances of that age who can engage in committee work, etc. So, would you care to comment on that?
Sure. Well, I think I'm probably a bit used to my name being mispronounced, but it's I think that the goal really is but thank you. Um, one statistic really kind of bears out, and I was also thinking about this with Les's comments, is remember the extraordinary voter turnout, unprecedented in the 2020 election, right? It's so easy because so much has happened in the midst of it. But remember, we were dealing with COVID. There was a modernization of the election system state by state to allow for example, automatic distribution of vote by mail, as one example, right? Increased availability of drop boxes so people can go and vote accessibly. It's kind of remarkable what happens to our election modernization system when we're concerned about a pandemic. You kind of wish that that was just par for the course in terms of appreciating our election system and making voting not only extraordinarily safe, but accessible to everyone. So, and remember that FISA, the federal agency, also found that the 2020 election was safe and secure as well. So we have a lot of positive examples of the voting electorate leaning in. And I think we have to just make sure that we kind of continue to cultivate both hope and courage because everyone needs to come out and vote. There's in the 2026 midterm and the upcoming presidential election, everyone should be voting. It should be the expectation that everyone is participating. And I find a lot of hope in the 2020 election outcome. But I will say that only 4 years later, when you look at the age gap in voting, because I look at these numbers and they become extremely election outcome determinative, maybe on the presidential kind of national level, but certainly locally and statewide. The rates of voters age 18 to 24 in the last midterm election was only 48%. And the rate of voters 65 plus participating in the franchise was 75%. That's a 27-point difference between the age cohorts, which is enormous. And I've worked to examine, for example, different forms of election mechanisms and their impact on voter turnout and the electoral margins, right? The sheer numbers. And when you look at the youth voters and a quick adjustment for what I view as common sense election administration mechanisms, for example, why do we not have as, as a normalization, the availability of on-campus polling locations? It is just common sense. In some of these universities, you have anywhere from 20,000 to 50,000 students. They should have an on-campus polling location. The expectation should be, and that decision is made on the county level, by the way. That's not a state level decision, and it's certainly not a federal level decision. And all of a sudden, you make it accessible. My research has found that when a polling location, I'll drop a link to the article too. It was just published in one of the premier higher education industry magazines. My research has found that when you have a polling location available on campus during the early voting period and on election day, you see such larger increase in voter turnout among the youth population that it's on par with the single best election administration remedy, which is election day registration. So we should not be in a position where we're picking one over another. I think that the call is for wide-stream election administration modernization through these common sense mechanisms. And it's a little boring, it's a little technocratic, but it has a huge outcome. And there's still an opportunity, especially as we head up not only to the midterms, but to the presidential election. I've worked with young people across the country in overturning election barriers imposed on them, access to use of student photo ID for proving their identification and their residence, for example, securing an on-campus polling location. In Florida, we overturned a statewide ban on the availability of on-campus polling locations during the early voting period in 2018. And 3 months later, we had the election was held, and in only the between when we secured the preliminary injunction and the election, and approximately 10 campuses in that interim brought a polling location on campus during that time period. 60,000 voters availed themselves of that mechanism. You're talking about only 10 campuses. You can only imagine what that would look like if polling locations on campuses were much more widespread, right? You
Yeah,
can
and
just only
I
imagine.
I can speak to that in terms of mail-in voting is not the answer. I was involved in ballot curing in the 13th congressional district in the last election, and a number of the ballots that we sought to cure were from students who put their where they were living rather than where they were registered on their ballot envelope, and that invalidated their vote unless we were able to get their parents to convince them to send in the ballot cure. And that effort paid off because we flipped that district by 187 votes, the closest election in that cycle in the nation. And it flipped from red to blue. The watchword we're adopting for this election is we're going to make the turnout too big to rig. And that's our goal that we'll be pursuing with turnout to win on August 1st in our meeting there. And that's a program that Indivisible Marin initiated, and we're hoping to spread statewide through Indivisibles.
I think that's such a great example, Joel. I'll give you another one also is in the North Carolina critical race for the state Supreme Court Justice, Sherry Beasley, who had been a congresswoman, Black woman, was running for the high bench, North Carolina. North Carolina, I teach election law at the law school level. I've taught it more times than I'd like to admit. And the students always, no matter where I'm teaching it, the students always ask me, why are all these cases coming out of North Carolina? Okay, because North Carolina is critical. Purple state, there's always chicanery, and it always ends up to the US Supreme Court creating jurisprudence that the rest of the nation has to deal with. The Sherry Beasley race was lost by approximately 410
Right.
ballots, statewide ballots. And when we investigated afterwards, the rejection of provisional ballots cast in a single county, Durham County in North Carolina, by Black youth associated with the local HBCU, historically Black college and university, that would have flipped the entire state. So, from a vote margin perspective, right? And I think that there's stories after stories of these, and I think that they're really remarkable because when we look at it's no wonder that we don't feel like our representatives reflect our values because they're not reflective of the voting population. And I think that the youth vote in particular, there are such concrete ways in which it can be protected and have such significant impact. But nobody knows what the 26th Amendment is, which is my ongoing campaign with Les. And I think that if we can, a lot of this is conceptualization and framework, and just one piece of that puzzle is the 26th Amendment, right? There are many pieces of the puzzle, but one is the 26th Amendment. And if we can start to identify, hey, that's age-based discrimination with regard to ballot to the access. We can do that on account of race, right? We could do it on account of gender, and the 26th Amendment allowed it on account of age. I think that we would be better off as a nation, and our representatives would more accurately reflect the base of the electorate.
So there's another question that was submitted, and I answered it online, but I'd like the perspective of the other panelists. And the question was how best to protect our voting machines now that Trump has fired the federal overseers. He's also invested in an allies company that builds voting machines. Former Dominion is now Liberty Voting. Boy, does that pretend not well. Anyway, my answer was the Election Assistance Commission, which was what Trump disbanded and fired the last commissioners of, doesn't oversee voting machines, but provides assistance to the state to certify and secure them. Voting machines are certified through state secretaries of state in California and elsewhere. The Secretary of State sets standards for testing voting machines to make them secure and accurate. So there are things that we need to worry about and things we don't need to worry about. And that would be one of them, at least from the what is the impact of firing the Election Protection Commission. What may be the threat is that he'll appoint new commissioners that will have nefarious intent rather than being supportive of state election infrastructure. Would anyone else care to address that?
Only to say it'll land in court. I mean, we're going to see it again. He did this because of the outcome in the Trump v. Barbara case regarding his power to eliminate commissioners that are under the executive branch. And so it'll just end up back in litigation. And I'm sorry to see my friends, the commissioners. I mean, they're brilliant. The EAC commissioners are fantastic. They serve a critical public role. They, among other things, including allowing for creating guidelines, certifications process, being a clearinghouse. They collected critical data from the secretaries of states as well regarding, election participation. But again, as Joel mentioned and others mentioned, we have a decentralized election system. And so that's actually a huge benefit. It's interesting because once upon a time we called for a uniform system. But in this way, the federalist system actually makes a lot of sense. There's no single prong that you can hit. It's actually quite a resilient system, and we need to continue to defend and participate in it.
I would like comments on where I think the vulnerability in part may be, which is actually seating those elected to Congress on January 2nd or shortly thereafter of 2027. And that may be where a counter to a January 6th mobilization of citizens in Washington, D.C. may be called for. I don't, that's all I can think of.
We actually, Mark and I wrote about this pretty extensively in, I think it's our second or first Dancing in the Dark. And at that point, many people weren't thinking about it. And again, there's no brilliance in any of this stuff. You just listen to what they say and take it seriously, right? It's not like the only brilliance is just listening. And the problem was that this process was started by the Democrats in Indiana, where they didn't like the outcome of an election there that was certified by the Republican Party in the state, and there did seem to be a lot of shenanigans going on, but the Democratic Congress wouldn't accept it and demanded. I think Leon Panetta ran the committee that did this. And it was a very integrity was fantastic, but the principle was it's a tough one to deal with. and that was that the the federal government was not going to accept the result of a state and its certification. Well, and when the Democrats finally prevailed by a few votes in a re-election, Cheney got up on the floor and said, this is right before Florida. He said, well, now we know what you're ready to do. We'll be ready. And I think actually some of the planning that went on in Florida came from that. But of course, there's a big difference in using basically the House Administrations Committee, which theoretically certifies these elections, for it to not to certify them. Or the other method is, let's say Texas doesn't want to certify certain congressional people. What do you do there? Obviously, if they do it, then the House Administration Committee is probably not going to seat them. And so there are many, many different ways to do this, but or this can be done. I think Mary brought up a good point. I am not a doomsdayer. I'm a believer that you got to look at doom in order to find the solutions and there are solutions to all these. And I think the other speakers have laid those out. And in this case, there is a growing awareness that this is a very likely first, depending upon how close the election is, this is very likely to occur. And one way that you react is if you can, there's really one election, and that's January 3rd. Everybody always thinks the election for the House is January 3rd. And that is when they pick the speaker. That's what everybody is focused on. And of course, you can, depending upon if you're organized, if the big Democratic states say, oh, well, you want to play that game in Texas, well, then we'll play that game and we won't seat anybody, or we won't certify anybody. The problem is it's not as strong a counter as it is for Republicans, since you have a Republican Congress right now. But I know there's a lot of work going into this. I think people are beginning to understand the law. I mean, not the law, but the past precedents. And as everybody in this call knows, the Senate follows the rules according to the Senate and who they seat, and the House follows the rules according to their rules on who's to be seated. There have been an exception in this with Adam Clayton Powell. I think there was a case that y'all will know about, but this is a real problem. And it's all a matter of, I think one of the things they're doing is they're flooding the zone. They're coming at us, as Mary pointed out, in so many different ways. And one way is not more important than the other. And we have to be very awake, and we have to be very operational on every level. And there are a lot of people doing that. I mean, we wish everybody gotten more alarmed earlier, but there is growing momentum in people's awareness, and there are a lot of smart people thinking about each part of this puzzle. And we've got to not just focus. I don't just need to focus on emergency powers. I need to focus on everything else as well. We have to be multitask the way they are. But they're very. Don't underestimate what Trump is doing. So he's really going for it. And then what I worry about with the emergency powers is all this other stuff fails. And of course, the one thing we really have to avoid. Let me finish with this. We cannot have violence. What was great about Black Lives Matter is when everybody sat back and realized, or when the leadership realized that we're going to cool everybody down, because the worst thing that could have happened is if we had a lot of violence in that time period where he could have used the insurrection and all these things. So we can do this nonviolently, and we've got to do it nonviolently, and there are ways to do it.
Thank you, Joel. Joel Ellinwood, do we have any more questions in the Q&A?
No, there are no more questions. Let's see. Well, wait a minute. There's an open one. What is the author of the Substack article mentioned by Les? And that's Jonathan Alter. Les, you're with us, so would you confirm that? You turned off your camera, but...
Yeah, Jonathan Alter was the author. The term rolling coup is in the headline. I can't remember the name of the article. Can you, Joel? I don't.
Jonathan's article, I don't think is that. I've forgotten the name of it, but it's Jonathan Alter, and it's easy to look up.
June 18th, I know was the date that it was published, so.
That helps. Yeah.
And the article in the Nation and various publications that Gephardt and Tim Wirth have put out called The Rolling Coup is also very, very good. The two of them should.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you really want to get technical, Jonathan Weiner, writing in the Washington Spectator, has done some very detailed work that's worth reading. And Brennan, I mean, there's some really good scholarship out there. Brennan is very good. And ACLU. The other thing is, don't forget to study. Everybody, when they finish tonight, please go to the ACLU link and look up NSPN7, because this is really is dangerous in terms of, and also, if you really want to wake up and get going, look at the speech that you can find on YouTube that Miller gave. I think it was last night, wasn't it? It's completely horrifying. Completely horrifying. I mean, it's right. Let's give your impression of it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's about a 6 minute, 7 minutes, and basically, he even says if people they don't look like us, they must be the internal enemy. This whole idea of domestic enemies, it's like Trump is. This is why I think sometimes maybe he does have advanced Alzheimer's, because he's going back and he's focusing on things that Roy Cohn was focusing on during the during the McCarthy period. I mean, the whole idea of the social democracy thing is very complicated for us, for everybody, because they're going to really pound away at it and try to divide Democrats over it. And they can be very effective given all the meetings, especially because I don't think anybody understands what social is or democracy. I mean, it's so archaic for the other generations, but they're going to try to make hay out of it. And I understand they're going to spend an extra. I just saw this in one report, an extra $300 million over at DoD, so DoD can get ready to tame communism in America.
Yeah.
Well, Les or Greg, I don't know if you have anything else, but I'd like to invite the other panelists to make any closing comments that they might like, as we've got approximately 8 minutes left in what we've scheduled, and we don't need to take all of that time, but I just invite the other panelists to make any closing comments they might like.
Okay, time's up. If there's no other comments, then on behalf of Indivisible El Dorado, I'd like to thank all our panelists for participating in today's webinar. Their collective knowledge, experience, and expertise is priceless as we edge closer to what I consider the most pivotal midterm election of the century, perhaps even in the history of our nation. Before we go, one quick reminder to all Indivisible El Dorado members, please register for our August 1st membership meeting. Go to our website and click on the Turnout to Win link to register. That's indivisibleeldorado.org. Again, thank you all for your attention and for attending today's webinar. That's it for tonight. Thank you, everybody.
Just to point out, this has been recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel.
And we'll have a link on our website. Yes.
Right.
Thanks all.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.